Now we get into chapter 2, and we read how he prepares the deliverer. And a man of the house of Levi went and took a wife as wife, a daughter of Levi. And we'll find out a little later his name is Amram and her name is Jochebed. And so the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. That's interesting. What a lousy time to get married and have kids. You ever think that, those of you who are still interested in having kids? You're just looking and going, I'm going to get married and have kids. Who knows what the economy's going to do? Who knows what those dumb Egyptians are going to do in terms of things out there? And yet here they are, just as a part of God's plan for their life, and it is God's plan because they're going to give birth to the deliverer. They go ahead and they get married. They go ahead and have children. God's going to take care of them. It's going to require faith, but God's going to take care of them. And so they hide the child for 3 months. That must have been a challenge. Those are very difficult 3 months to hide a child when they're looking for all of the sons to kill them. And when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, and put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And Hebrews says that was a step of faith. Yes. Yeah, there are crocodiles in that river. And so she takes her child and puts the child there. And his sister, Miriam, she's probably about 14 or 15 at this point, she stood afar off to know what would be done to him. And so there they are, walking by faith, but they want to see what God's going to do here. So they put the child in there. Aaron's probably about 3 years old, a little older than Moses, so he hasn't come under this edict. He survives. They're going to find out what happens to this boy. And then the daughter of Pharaoh came down. Oh, just happened to. Oh, no, there's no just happened to's. To wash herself at the river. And her maidens walked along the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get the ark. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. And she had compassion on him, and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." And then his sister Miriam comes up and says to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from among the Hebrew children?" There would be plenty who would be ready to nurse, given the loss of their child, "that she may nurse the child for you." And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And so the maiden went and called the child's mother. And then Pharaoh's daughter said to Jochebed, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I'll give you wages." And so the woman took the child and nursed him. Now you talk about doing exceeding abundantly above all you could ask or think. She gets the child given back to her. She gets to nurse her own child, continue to raise that child, and she gets paid to do it. Isn't God good? That's a great deal. They give you a little pocket money while we're doing this. It's wonderful. And you can imagine as she takes that Moses, he's going to be named in a moment, into her arms. You can imagine how she raised him. Yahweh is God, Yahweh is God, Yahweh is God, Yahweh is God, Yahweh is God. Pyramids are nothing, Sphinx are nothing, sorcery is demonic, God is everything, Yahweh. And just speaking of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the history of this great people in those formative years. Someone has said, "You give me a child until they're 7 years old and you can have them the rest of their life." There may be something to that. And she got to have them for quite a while. It's quite a while before they weaned children in those days. Beautiful. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And so she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. The name Moses means drawn out. How prophetic. God says, you go ahead and name him Moses. And I won't even bother to change his name. It fits him. But you have no idea how it fits him and who he's going to draw out of this nation that he's been born into. And it's interesting to note, too, concerning the parents of Moses, that they raised their child, and they raised their child based upon faith. They raise that child the best that they know how to raise that child until that child is taken out of their hands. And for 80 years, they're going to see very little fruit in terms of what a parent would want to see out of their son. He is going to look like an absolute loser for 80 years. Looks like he's going to be a nothing. Looks like nothing is going to happen. Looks like our trust in God concerning that child and God getting something good out of him, and it looks like he's been hopelessly brainwashed by the Egyptians. God will never be able to undo what it is that they've had 40 years to pound into his mind. Want to bet? Want to bet? It's a great encouragement to us as parents to be patient. Be patient because of the God we serve. Now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, and so a 40-year period, the first 40 years of Moses' life occurs right there between verses 10 and 11. And so here he is coming through that first 40 years, and the Bible tells us concerning that first 40 years that he was trained up in a powerful way as it relates to the things of Egypt. In fact, Moses' life, he lived 120 years, and his life breaks into three 40-year periods, 120 years, three 40-year periods, and the first 40-year period was he was raised in Egypt. And here he is in this land of Egypt getting all of their education, all of the great things that he was learning there, and as he was becoming learned, as Stephen preached in Acts chapter 7, and all of the wisdom of the Egyptians, mighty in word and deed. He spends the first 40 years of his life becoming something. And then he spends the next 40 years of his life on the backside of a desert, becoming nothing. And then he spends the last 40 years of his life learning how God is able to bring something out of nothing. And that's the way that he works in all of our lives. So this first 40 years, here he is. He's becoming learned in all of the wisdom of the Egyptians, mighty in word and deed. This guy was a great pupil. He learned everything that had been put forward to him. And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, that he went out to his brethren and he looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way, and he looked that way. And when he saw no one, failed to look up, it was just commonly spoken concerning this verse, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And so he saw the need for God's people to be delivered from the oppression of Egypt, and so he takes it into his hands. And he's the right man, he's in the right place, but the timing's wrong. And it ends up in a disaster. And so he went out on the next day, and behold, two Hebrew men were fighting with one another. And he said to the one who did the wrong, "Why are you striking your companion?" And then the man said to him, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" And so Moses feared and said, "Surely this thing is known. They're going to kill me for this." And the Bible tells us in the New Testament that Moses was baffled because he thought that they would understand. He thought God's people would understand that he was come to deliver them and that they would have followed him. And here he takes his first step in what he believed was God's will for his life, and his leadership is utterly rejected by the people. Completely and totally rejected. And so when Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. And right there, Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well, and so begins the second 40-year period of his life. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And then the shepherds came and drove them away, so that these shepherds, these guys, would wait till they filled up the trough. As soon as they got them filled, okay, looks like they got them filled, then they'd bring their herds in and lap up all the water and make them do it all over again. Nice guys. And then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. And when they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "How is it that you have come so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock." And so he said to his daughters, "And where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." And then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses, and she bore him a son and called his name Gershom, which means stranger there, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land." And it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. And then the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. And so God heard their groaning, and God remembered His covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. So God hadn't forgotten about them. He hadn't forgotten about His plan for them. And we read how He prepares the deliverer. And a man of the house of Levi went and took a wife as wife, a daughter of Levi. And we'll find out a little later his name is Amram and her name is Jochebed. And so the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. That's interesting. What a lousy time to get married and have kids. You ever think that, those of you who are still interested in having kids? You're just looking and going, I'm going to get married and have kids. Who knows what the economy's going to do? Who knows what those dumb Egyptians are going to do in terms of things out there? And yet here they are, just as a part of God's plan for their life, and it is God's plan because they're going to give birth to the deliverer. They go ahead and they get married. They go ahead and have children. God's going to take care of them. It's going to